Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So of course, over the weekend, the bill to raise the debt ceiling was finally signed into law by President Joe Biden, but the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy made some alarming comments that really worried a lot of people who are currently receiving Social Security. So we're going to be going over those comments, what he said, and what that could possibly mean moving forward. Also, we'll be discussing why the expected Social Security increase could actually be cut in half. So we'll be going over that as well. But before I go ahead and dive into the main content of today's video, if you wouldn't mind helping me out real quickly by just giving this video a like, that just helps out with the good old YouTube algorithm, and also consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already. Okay, so once again, over the weekend, the debt ceiling was raised. The bill was signed into law by the president. Of course, a lot of Republicans were upset because they wanted even more spending cuts to take place. They weren't very happy with what Kevin McCarthy was able to do at the negotiating table with Joe Biden, but a lot of other Republicans were very happy because they were able to at least get some spending cuts. And of course, the reason they're wanting to have these spending cuts is the fact that over the past 15 years, the national debt has really ballooned out of control, because back in 2008, we had a national federal debt of $10 trillion. And as we're sitting here today, it's at $32 trillion and growing by the minute. So Republicans want to get this national federal debt under control, but Democrats also weren't too happy because they, quite frankly, did not want any spending cuts to take place at all. But the majority of Democrats did vote for this bill to pass, but at the end of the day, if they had it their way 100%, they would not have agreed to any spending cuts at all. And of course, Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, was, he actually wanted a lot more spending cuts, but he said in an interview that Joe Biden pretty much walled off most of what he could choose to cut from, that they were only able to cut from around 11% of the budget. So that really did not leave him a lot of room to work with. And of course, if he had it his way, he would have had 100% of the budget to work with to cut from. And of course, the other 89% that he did not get to cut from included federal programs such as Social Security and Medicare. So he says that moving forward, he actually wants to set up a bipartisan commission of both Republicans and Democrats. And within this commission, they want to look for other areas in which they can cut from the budget from. So of course, we have many recipients of Social Security and Medicare very alarmed by those comments, like, why are we trying to cut Social Security and Medicare? Again, Social Security is not an entitlement program. We work our entire careers. We pay into the Social Security payroll tax, Medicare payroll tax. Why are we even talking about cutting from these programs? Why are we not looking at other areas instead? So, according to the American Independent, McCarthy says Biden stopped him from cutting Social Security and Medicare. So House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said on Wednesday that he wants to create a commission to look into future cuts to Social Security and Medicare because President Joe Biden refused to allow any cuts to the programs during negotiations over raising the debt ceiling. He said, quote, "We only got to look at 11% of the budget to find these cuts. We had to look at the entire budget." When anchor Harris Faulkner asked McCarthy why Republicans didn't see the entire budget during debt ceiling talks, McCarthy replied, quote, "The president walled off all the others." McCarthy said the majority driver of the budget is mandatory spending. It's Medicare, Social Security, interest on the debt. He told Faulkner that Congress was not done cutting spending out of the budget. He said, quote, "You know what? I'm going to make some people uncomfortable by doing that, but I'm not going to give up on the American people. This is the first step. I'm going to announce a commission coming forward from the Speaker from bipartisan on both sides of the aisle to look for possible future budget cuts. It's unclear who would be on the committee or how it would be different from the House Budget Committee, which exercises oversight of the annual federal budget. A McCarthy spokesperson did not return a request for comment from the American Independent Foundation regarding the committee's makeup. Now, obviously, if they were going to set up a bipartisan committee, of course, it would have to be made up of both Republicans and Democrats to get something done. More than likely, it would need to be moderate Democrats and Republicans. Now, I certainly agree that they do need to cut some spending or, bring in more revenues, because quite frankly, having a federal national debt of $32 trillion that's just ballooning up every single day and going higher and higher is unacceptable. I mean, we have our children and grandchildren to look after here. I mean, if we have a national debt of over $100 trillion, that's going to call into question what our future really is as a country if we can't get our national debt under control. But again here, why are we even discussing Social Security and Medicare as a potential cut? Social Security is not an entitlement program. It's not something that we're paying out of our national debt with. It's, people are working their entire lives. They're paying anywhere between 6.2 to 12.4% out of each and every paycheck that they're receiving, depending on whether they're an employee or an employer. And, why are we talking about cutting Social Security and Medicare when that's really not the problem? Maybe we should be looking at other programs to cut, but certainly not Social Security. And McCarthy makes a comment here saying that he's not going to give up on the American people, but yes, American people rely on Social Security benefits. A lot of people, what they receive in their Social Security check is pretty much they're entirely dependent on that check, and they don't really have any other source of income. So if you're going to cut Social Security and lower checks for the American people who receive them and completely rely on them, I'm not sure if you're really backing the American people there. So sure, yes, we probably do need to get our national debt under control because $32 trillion in debt is terrible. But cutting Social Security and Medicare to do that, I really don't think that's really the best option. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below on that. And of course, at the beginning of this year, we did receive almost a record-breaking amount of a cost of living adjustment increase of 8.7%. However, next year, a lot of experts are saying that we should not be so optimistic of how much of an increase that we will be receiving. Of course, this is not necessarily a bad thing, and we will be going over why in just a second. So according to the Motley Fool, why Social Security's COLA could be cut in half next year. So they say that a lower cost of living adjustment has nothing to do with Social Security running out of money, which of course is good news. Fixed income is a fact of life for most retirees. However, the good news is that income isn't completely set in stone. Every year, the Social Security Administration determines how much of a cost of living adjustment beneficiaries will receive. The most recent adjustment was 8.7%, the highest in 4 decades. But retirees shouldn't expect such a big raise in 2024. Here's why Social Security's COLA could be cut in half next year. So they go over some past examples. So automatic annual COLAs didn't become a reality until 1975. Before then, it literally took an act of Congress for Social Security benefits to be raised to reflect higher cost of living. So yes, before 1975, Congress actually had to pass a law to say that Social Security recipients should receive more money because of all the inflation that took place. But since they passed that law in 1975, every single year there is going to be a cost of living adjustment guaranteed, depending how high inflation rose using the CPIW metric. So the article goes on to say that the past nearly 5 decades show several cases where a year with an especially high COLA was followed by a much smaller adjustment the following year. For example, the highest COLA before the current adjustment was 11.2%, set in 1981. 1 year later, the COLA was less than 2/3 of that level. So up on the screen here, you can see some examples. So like they mentioned there, in 1981, the COLA was 11.2%. However, in 1982, it fell all the way down to 7.4%, and then the next year in 1983, it came down to 3.5%. Then, of course, in 2008, there was a cost of living adjustment of 5.8%. However, in 2009 and 2010, there was no cost of living adjustment at all. That's because there was no inflation taking place during those years. The CPIW was at 0% or less than 0%, which in that case, you can't actually receive a negative COLA. You just receive the same amount as you did in the prior year. So the article goes on to say that even with the small increase in inflation, it's looking quite possible that the next COLA will be roughly half as much as this year's adjustment. In April, the CPIW increased by 4.6% year over year. That rate is only a little over half of the latest COLA's 8.7%. If inflation declines only slightly, retirees' next cost of living adjustment could be cut in half. The SSA calculates COLAs based on the average CPIW during the third quarter compared to the previous year. There's a good chance the Fed's rate hikes could cause inflation to decline from current levels by quarter 3. Now, of course, with all this, we both have some good news and bad news. Starting out with the good news is, yes, inflation is coming down. So even though we could have a lower cost of living adjustment next year, that just means that the COLA that we received this year, of course, we were able to hold on to a lot of our purchasing power. The dollar was strong with what we received. If inflation was out of control this year, then the cost of living adjustment that we received this year pretty much would have meant nothing at this point because we would not be keeping up with inflation. So of course that is the good news. The bad news, of course, is that we still use the CPIW metric for the COLA instead of CPIE, and pretty much every single year the CPIE is a little bit higher than the CPIW, and with the CPIE that pretty much tracks inflationary items where seniors spend a lot more money on, such as healthcare. So it's very possible that the CPIE could actually be a tad bit higher than the CPIW, and the cost of living adjustment increase that we receive next year will be lower than what inflation actually is and what we're spending our money on. Now we have a couple of very important dates coming up. So of course on June 13th, we'll have the inflation data for May, so that will give us an even better idea of what the COLA could be for next year. And then of course on October 12th, a few months from now, we'll have our official COLA number that's going to give us the CPIW numbers for September, and we'll be able to compare the third quarter of this year to the third quarter of last year, and we'll be able to come up with the official number for the COLA increase for 2024. But that's all the news that I have for today's video. I certainly hope that you enjoyed. If you did, again, I would greatly appreciate if you could give this video a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already, and I will see you in the next video.